A Stanford stunner at the JMA Wireless Dome. Welcome, everybody. This is Syracuse Football postgame presented by Crouse Health, the official healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. You got Brent Axe, you got Emily Leiker, and Stanford breaks all of our hearts at the Dome under the Friday night lights. Kicks a field goal as time expires to win by, don't know if this quite fits scoregami standards, but 26-24 is certainly an odd score for a football game.
Yeah.
And it was a grinder at the Dome tonight. The offense just never really got it going for Syracuse, put aside a couple of drives that Little League Kyle, or in this case, Emily, Josh Allen Kyle, put together a couple of times. But Fran Brown saying after the game that Syracuse got out physicaled. There's one play in particular that we will talk about here shortly that was really on the minds of Syracuse fans after this game. And we've got some injury updates to give you, which were a surprise that came out of
Yes.
pregame as well. And of course, we'll get plenty of reaction from our Syracuse Sports Insiders as we go through the evening here. And to become a Syracuse Sports Insider, all you have to do is text the word orange to 315-847-3895 to get direct text message access to us. And Emily, the text line was certainly used tonight as people were blowing off steam and the ups and downs of this game, and then ultimately to express some frustration at the end of this game, including some people that say they're going to cancel their trip to Vegas, which, guys, it's Vegas. Okay.
Go
Don't do
anyway.
that. Yeah, go
Also,
anyway.
it's still going to be interesting football. Like tonight
Yes.
was interesting, which we'll talk about, but
Yeah.
that overreaction.
So there's one play in particular that people were tagging you, tagging me, had questions about on the text line, and that was 4th and 9 for Stanford. Now, you go back to the Georgia Tech game, Syracuse short 4th down situation, Georgia Tech, and Fidel Diggs just ate it alive. And it was such a huge play for Syracuse. It wasn't as late in that game as it was in this game, mind you, but a huge 4th down play that essentially lifts them to victory. It was quite the opposite in this case, Emily.
Yeah, and I want to get back into like overall reaction kind of once we go through this, and obviously this will set up the result of the game. But a lot of people baffled that they left Lewis in one-on-one coverage with Alec Iomanor there, all preseason, all ACC wide receiver, very talented dude. Asked Fran at post game. That was my first question to Fran, and he kind of in the end just boiled it down to kid made a play, we didn't make a play. The one like interesting part of his answer was that he said initially when they went out there, Iomanor was lined up against Bellamy. Bellamy and Lewis played cornerback almost the entire game for some various reasons we'll get into. Originally, he was lined up against Bellamy. They went into a timeout. I believe that would have been the timeout that Syracuse called, because I think Stanford called one and then Syracuse called one. And they kind of reevaluated. They decided that they wanted to pressure the quarterback, which is why you see there was 3 rushers there, 3 linemen going after Ashton Daniels, and that they wanted to switch Lewis over to take on Alec. They thought that was going to be a better matchup. Clarence Lewis played a good game. He had an interception. He had several pass breakups. I don't have his full stat line pulled up, but like I think that's a reasonable decision for them to make. Obviously, it stings to see that happen, and I understand that's a tough play to watch, but it was a good ball. It was a back shoulder ball. I don't know how much more Clarence could have done. Yes, maybe you pull someone else into coverage there, but I understand why they put 3 down, going after Daniels, because Daniels is a mobile quarterback, and if you only rush 2 on him, there's a chance he just takes off and goes on his own and picks up the 9 yards. And Syracuse's tackling has not been good, especially in that kind of mid-distance one-on-one scenario. So like we can what if it to hell, and I'm sure people will for the next few days. And certainly all of us in the moment felt the same as you guys, and we're like, that was kind of weird. Like, why did they go one-on-one with him there? Like, why didn't they do more to stop that? But having had a little bit to sit on it, I don't think it was as baffling a decision as maybe the initial reaction was. And It's just kind of one of those plays that happens in football.
Yeah, I think the bafflement comes from what you brought up is the timeout. If this was like bang, bang play, they're running up to the line, you don't have time to react to it, maybe that'd be one thing, but people were asking, why didn't they bring the house more? And particularly, why was he in single coverage? I think the more egregious thing, even as good as Lewis can be, is he was in single coverage. I think you do have to double your best receiver in that case, and you had a timeout to decide that. And there's only so many guys on the field. And Emily, you brought up a good point. Like Ashton Daniels, people were making Garrett Schrader comparisons to him tonight, and I think that's fair. I mean, he could take off and run. He's a big dude, and he's hard to bring down. And Syracuse was not tackling well, right? So with the timeouts and the time, but sometimes dudes just beat dudes, and that was just a great football play. So once they got into field goal range, you could kind of hear the groans in the dome that Stanford was going to set up what they did, that field goal. So that's that scenario. But all night, Emily, this was an interesting, while we're on the defensive side of the ball, it was a clear kind of bend but don't break defense. They did get Stanford off the field a lot. They did hold them to field goals in certain situations. They certainly set up the offense to have opportunities to just squeeze one out tonight, just grind one out. Not your best night, as we'll talk about. They did not run the football at all tonight. This was all on McCord, and he was up and down in this game as well. But ultimately, the defense did not break until the moment you don't want them to, like the last moment, the last play, the 4th and 9, but they did hand the offense a lot of opportunities that unfortunately they didn't cash in on tonight. But I think that's what people remember: the missed tackles, the 4th and 9 play, and ultimately the defense did break, because they're going to look at the scoreboard and see what happened there. But it was a physical game from one standpoint. Fran Brown flat out said, I asked him at the end of the press conference, just how would you characterize this? And he said, we got out physicaled. And he said, even Stevie Wonder could see that, right? And given the emphasis that this coaching staff has had, Emily, think of after the Ohio game, and they were upset they were not as physical as they should have been in that game. Georgia Tech, they clearly out physicaled. And then this one tonight, Stanford heard it for 2 weeks, how bad they were, and they got to fly across the country and all the hype about Syracuse. And the Stanford defensive line certainly took it out on that Syracuse offensive line, which they just didn't. I will shudder to think what the PFF grades are going to be. They did not play well. It was a poor performance for the offensive line. They switched out guys. Big Spoon came out at left tackle. Enrique Cruz came in, and they just got run over tonight. And plain and simple, that was one of the more glaring things we saw out there tonight.
Yeah, not to go back to a small detail, but when Brown made that Stevie Wonder comment, I was like, oh. The line from like social media that's like, oh, if I had a nickel for every time something happened, like I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't weird, but it's because Dino made a Stevie Wonder post-game comment, and I just went to look up what it was. It was about Oronde Gadsden, which OG did not have a great game tonight, but he was double covered, which, guys, that's what happens with OG. As soon as it's what happened in 2022, 6 games into the season, like you look at Oronde's numbers through the first 6 games of the season compared to the last 5. Now, granted, they won the first 6 and lost the last 5 too, so that does impact it a little bit. But also, like, teams just catch on to him very fast. And like, if you're gonna double cover a guy, like you're probably gonna double cover Oronde Gadsden. And yes, there are more options for teams to double cover now, but there wasn't like a bigger answer. I know like some people ask like, was he hurt? Like, was something going on? Yada, yada, yada. Nope, he was just double covered. And sometimes, like, that's all that it is.
The text line was asking me throughout the night, literally, where's Gadsden? And I don't think they meant, like, where is he in the offense? I think they literally, like, is he out there? I think people are like, is he actually playing out there? And he was double teamed. And you said it, that's going to be an issue going forward here. Teams are going to, especially with a bye week and extra time to plan, they're going to plan to take him out of the action. Now, I was surprised how much he was taken out of it tonight, because Syracuse knows that too, right? So it's a matter of balancing it out and finding how you overcome those double teams. But Kyle McCord throws a couple interceptions tonight, Emily. While we're on the subject of the tight ends, one of those and it wasn't just Dan Villari. I'm not going to pick on him, but it was the most glaring one because I think some timing was off for the receivers throughout the night. And look, McCord was under more pressure tonight than he clearly was in the first two games of the year. Syracuse had negative 13 rushing yards at halftime. They only had 26 rushing yards in this game. And Kyle McCord had a chunk of that with his 19-yard touchdown run. Quinn Allen, 8 attempts, 25 yards tonight. My guy, Yassine Willis, got out there a little bit. He just couldn't get going. And he had 9 yards tonight. And McCord, ultimately, his stats were 5 attempts for negative 8 yards. But he had that 19-yard touchdown out there. So this is something we need to mention. Pre-game, we're looking out there, and we're like, wait a minute, where's Will Nixon? So Will Nixon, who was getting reps at running back, did not play tonight. Fran Brown saying afterwards he's been dealing with a quad issue, okay? Emmanuel Ross, who hasn't really cracked the lineup too much, but was somebody who popped at training camp and, certainly
he is on the depth chart.
He's on the depth chart, so those depth chart guys stand out. And, with Holy Cross coming up next week, there's a guy maybe you'd see a little more on the field, but he's dealing with an injury right now, which Fran said happened just 2 days ago at practice. Zeed Haynes was not even in the building tonight for what we were told was a personal matter that he was dealing with, and no further details were given on that. Tank Wilson, not out there tonight as well, so the defensive line loses the tank and some big depth out there up front. So these were all things. Now, Fran said, Emily, that Tank's issue was something that was from before the bye week. It's not something that happened in between Georgia Tech in this game, so a lingering issue that was serious enough that it kept them out there tonight. So here in game 3, Syracuse is dealing with depth issues.
Yeah, and this I think leads into a broader point I wanted to make about the game and how I think we'll view it moving forwards, but also like how people are viewing it now and just reaction, because I have seen some very oversized reactions. We talked about the reactions on the text line and people saying they're canceling trips to Vegas and all that. I have seen a lot more measured reactions as well, and people understanding things happen. I think what I'll say is that even though some of the problems we're seeing are feeling familiar, right? Penalties, the injury crop up today, some of the run defense stuff, they are still inherently different issues because it's different personnel, and they're going to have inherently different solutions and inherently different methods of solving them because there is different personnel around. There's different people making the mistakes. There's different people analyzing the mistakes. There's different people coaching these players through the mistakes. And like, we are seeing those things like that, like those differences, like already in action, right? Like, I think like the clearest example is the injuries, right? Like years past, we come in post game and ask about 5 players that are injured and that just didn't play in the game. We are not getting a single answer on any of those guys.
They've all got owies, right?
They've all got owies, or it's we have to wait and see, even though like clearly at least a couple of those guys had been injured for several days or leading up to the game. And so the fact that we saw that, like that Fran directly addressed, he said the word x-rays. I was like stunned that he said, which I don't think we mentioned, Marcellus Barnes Jr. was having back spasms. That's why he left the game. Had x-rays in the locker room, but they were clear, they were good, so they're hoping that he'll be good to go soon. Getting that addressed. The fact that there was no even like real shred of defensiveness out of Fran in his post-game presser about a loss where he has a coaching decision critiqued for the first time, and all this different stuff is going on. Like, even though some of these problems feel the same, they're not. Like they are, but like they're not. Like, so I think that's just like a good thing to keep in mind moving forward. And I understand the disappointment. I understand the frustration. I understand that losing to Stanford is a stunner, is a shocker, like we said, and those are words that we used in our stories and our headlines. Like, I had the bold, like my Syracuse Stanford prediction belongs on like freezing cold takes or old takes exposed.
Yeah.
Like, we all thought this game was going to go a different way. So I understand it feeling different, but I think how they move forward from this will also look different. Yeah.
Well, Emily, here's the thing. How many games did Fran Brown lose at Georgia? Kyle McCord lost one game at Ohio State, and that was the game. You can't lose. Michigan, right? And he was actually asked about that afterwards. Like, you lost a game at Michigan. What did you learn from that? You're going to lose more games here. This is a team that's going to lose again this season. And, maybe they'll stun me and finish with one loss, and this will be the one that they learn from. I think it's a little more realistic. They're going to lose a few more of these. So how both Fran Brown and McCord handle losing, not only this week, but going forward. I mean, look, you got Holy Cross next week. You got a get right game before they head on the road, neutral site against UNLV, NC State, and you really start digging into conference play. And, congratulations to Stanford, who gets their first ACC win. And Emily, they're the team that flies all the way across the country. Now, they were smart about it. They stayed an extra day in Syracuse. I don't know how much that helped or hurt. We were talking about this after the Georgia Tech game. How much is this pause in a bye week going to hurt a team that you could see starting to build some momentum here? Look, Stanford just ran them over. They out-physicaled Syracuse. As Fran Brown put it, the offense could not get going outside of a few drives from Kyle McCord. So McCord, who was one of the highest rated passers in the country, all the accolades that he was getting, the conversations about being in the Heisman race and all these things. Tonight, so much gets put on his shoulders, and he had to throw on the run. He did not have any help from his running game, as we brought up here. I mean, let's go through it here, Emily. I brought up Villari earlier. McCord throws a pick six in the third quarter. There was a timing route. He wanted to hit Villari. He did take accountability for it after the game, but this was on Villari. He did not turn around in time on a route, and Mitch Leiker for Stanford, 71 yards the other way. McCord responds to that with a 9-play, 75-yard touchdown drive. We see Little League Kyle. We see Josh Allen leaping into the end zone. It's an exhilarating 19-yard touchdown. All right, Kyle's back, but he comes out after that. He throws an interception to Jay Green of Stanford, his second pick of this game. Stanford goes down, 35-yard field goal. Again, the defense holds them to that. It's 23-17. The offense goes 3 and out. Oh, man, what's going on here? But then the defense holds again. Third and 10, 6:40 to go. McCord responds to that with a 7-play, 60-yard scoring drive. Now, Jackson Meeks got the touchdown, but Darryl Gill Jr., there's a name we haven't heard a ton so far this year. He makes 2 huge catches in that scoring drive, and then you're just waiting because there's, 3:13 to go after that, and we saw what Stanford did, an 11-play, 54-yard drive, which caps the game, and McCord didn't have a chance to come back out and win it even if he wanted to. So McCord was all over the place tonight, Emily, and we saw him under pressure, and I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. Look, they still almost uglied out this win. He still had 339 yards passing. McCord's not Superman. He's going to make mistakes, particularly when he's got no help from his running game. But even with all the issues on offense, he almost pulled this rabbit out of his hat tonight. That's what having a true QB1 can do. He doesn't have his best night by far, and he still almost pulled this one out.
Right. Yeah. McCord had ups and downs like everyone in this game did. And, I think this is the type of swinging back and forth in a game that you don't want. Those interceptions, those turnovers, those big receptions, on both sides, those are plays that you want to happen. And then you just have the momentum the whole time. And I think it's so hard when you're getting those. It's like you're peaking your heart rate and then plummeting back down to a 50. And that's just not healthy or helpful for anyone. But yeah, this was still a good game for McCord. I don't see those 2 interceptions and go, oh, everything we knew about McCord is wrong. McCord's not a good quarterback. Yada yada yada. He is still he's still showing us more. He's still growing. That rushing touchdown was his first career rushing touchdown. That's a guy who's still evolving this far into his college career at a second stop, all of this stuff. And I think we'll continue to see good things out of him. You could tell he was pretty down on himself post game. He brought up the fact that through his entire football career, dating back to Little League, he can probably count on two hands how many losses he suffered. Like, this is a kid that's used to winning. But he didn't blame that interception on Valari. He said, look, like, I don't want to pin anything on him. That was miscommunication. It was both of us. He still was saying all the right things as a leader. So I don't think perception changes about McCord from this game at all.
Look, it's on Valari. He had to turn around and look for that football. The timing was, and that was one of those throws where it's not like McCord was rushed or anything. Look, sometimes the timing's off because you're running out of the pocket, which he typically doesn't want to do. He can if he needs to, but Valari's got to look for that ball, and Valari has struggled in the passing game this year. So I wonder going forward how they're going to evaluate that. Do you just say it's a bad day, or do you see a trend developing here, especially when you have so many other weapons? I mean, Trevor Pena got over 100 yards tonight and continues to be the safety valve for McCord. Meeks was more active. We mentioned Darrell Gill Jr. Justice Ross Simmons is healthy. He was on the field, and I think we're going to see more of him against a Holy Cross situation. He still has to kind of crack his way into the lineup. Amari Hatcher had a big touchdown tonight. The turf monster bit the Stanford corner. Hatcher gets open. Hatcher was targeted in this game tonight a bunch. He ended up with 3 catches for 84 yards, including that 67-yard touchdown that we brought up. But Emily, I was talking to somebody pregame. We were right there, and I know those names are ahead of him. But man, Justice Ross Simmons is a big dude. He stands out. And if they can find a way to weave him in there somehow, it's just going to give McCord another target. And look, if Valari continues to struggle the way he has, that's going to kind of check. I know it's a different position, but it's going to check another guy kind of off the list that maybe McCord just can't trust and can't target going forward. And they won't call as many passing plays for. So they, even with Zeed Haynes out tonight, they still had depth at receiver and they still have targets there going forward. So it was interesting just to see. Look, McCord was going to get that taste of adversity. I mean, that first half against Ohio, whatever, that's the first game of the year. That's a different circumstance. But it was interesting to see how he handled it tonight, how Fran Brown handled it tonight. I think it wasn't Jeff Nixon's best play calling night. He was probably scrambling a little bit because that Stanford, Fran was mentioning after the game, Fran would show 5, but then rush 6. And like they were moving things around constantly. And that offense just had to adjust time after time. And not being able to run the football. Syracuse had, LaQuint Allen didn't go off in the first couple of games, but I think he had 90 yards or more, correct me if I'm wrong, in each of those first 2 games. So certainly was giving more support there than what you saw in a situation tonight. I mean, you go into halftime with negative 13 rushing yards. It just shows you how that offense could not get going. And they didn't get anything going. That Hatcher play was 28 seconds before halftime. They really struggled. And we saw a lot more Jack Stonehouse in this game than we've seen in the first 2 games combined.
Yeah, they really need to sort out the run game and their usage of LaQuint. We did see him get involved in the receiving game again, and I think he had 4 catches for 43 yards. And it's not showing the yards after catch here. He always has a huge 46 yards after catch, which is actually more yards than he ended up with net receiving.
Wow.
So they need to figure that out. You just want to see him involved more, because when he is touching the ball, like it's always resulting in something good. Like there's never you never see a bad LaQuint play. I feel like he's like one of the most consistent guys on the team, and so whether that's just the plays they're calling for him, the line needing to open up a little bit more, I think that's certainly part of it, but that definitely needs to improve going forward, just both to give a little pressure off McCord and just to get LaQuint the ball more.
That's what we think. Let's see what our Syracuse Sports Insiders had to say about this one. And of course, you can always text us at 315-847-3895. We would love for you to become a Syracuse Sports Insider today, even if just to blow off some steam during games, as plenty of you were texting. During the game, you can text me your thoughts, your opinions, your questions on Syracuse Sports anytime. We'll send you stuff throughout the week. Sent you a lot of stuff tonight, some videos from the quad, in addition to all the game day stuff that you get. And it's just $3.99 a month, but you can try it free for 2 weeks before signing on board to become a Syracuse Sports Insider. And we would love for you guys to hop on board if you haven't had the chance already. From Frank, who says, under no circumstances can you get beat over the top on that 4th and 9. Fran Brown and Elijah Robinson are going to have to answer some questions about that defensive call, as we were discussing there. I mean, again, pick your poison. Do you bring the house? Do you double team? Between the two, I probably would have preferred double team and try the pass rush to get there, as you brought up, Emily, because Daniels can escape the rush, but people had some questions about that one in the moment for sure. Jeff says everyone's going to talk about struggles coming off the bye, but how about struggles when we're a featured national game? It's one thing when it's a Clemson-type team. You got to win this kind of game. Eyeballs matter. I mean, look, stuff happens in sports. There's been a bunch of teams that have lost national televised games. Notre Dame comes to mind against teams they shouldn't lose to. But Syracuse, when they have had the spotlight, ESPN games, primetime games, usually Syracuse does well on Friday night games, but more often than not in recent years that they've come up short when an ABC, ESPN, ESPN2 type game is lined up. So I could see that. I could see that you want to come through in those situations. So Holy Cross doesn't fit that description, Emily, but UNLV, kind of unique Friday night, Fox Sports picking this one up, an audience that doesn't typically see Syracuse football in a NFL stadium where they've played the Super Bowl, and it's a prime spot where you don't want to stub your toe again. All these things that people have been saying about Syracuse football and McCord and all the things that have been discussed, you got to keep validating it, and that's going to be their next shot to do it. Let's see. Robbie T says a lot of us needed to be brought back down to earth, and this game did just that. Stanford's defensive coordinator and defensive line coach came up with a great scheme that really baffled the offense. Steve N says what would have been a W turns into one of the worst losses in SU history. Oh, wow. Holy Cross next week, and a 3-1 record will be meaningless due to this horrendous loss.
I don't know about you, Brent, but even as a fan, like, as much as these close losses sting, I would much rather be engaged through the end of the game because I think there's a real chance of my team winning than to have my team blown out like 60 points to 0, as was the case several times last year.
100%. That the slow death is worse than, somebody just knocking you off like that, Tony Soprano style. I'd rather lose like that. I'm with you. John P says, if that's what happened to Tony Soprano, we don't know, but I think so. John P says this is the type of game that Syracuse needs to win to show they're past the Dino era, and it shows that Fran Brown has plenty of work to do. The layoff killed this team. The penalties continue to happen, and it's inexcusable. The Fran Brown honeymoon era has come to an end. Penalties went both ways, though, Emily. Stanford certainly helped Syracuse a lot, particularly in the first half, with some penalties, some holding penalties on the offensive side of the ball that gave Syracuse a break. So as much as you don't want to see, that ugly stat creep back up, because that was the main issue under Dino Baber, Stanford certainly got into it a little bit. The officials tonight, there were some calls that I get it. I loved it when we were in a timeout.
Oh my God.
And then we came out of the timeout and the ACC official said, we're going to review that play. What the heck were you doing for the 2.5 minutes? We were all just sitting around, right?
Literally the entire press box groaned.
Oh,
like there was you just heard it like ripple down the row. We were all like, what's going on?
There's no cheering in the press box, but there's certainly groaning in the press box when that happens. From Nate, who says what this game showed was that there's still a long ways to go from having the depth necessary to play big time. Long way to go. The late scratches proved to be killer. And the offensive line. So let's look at the guys that were out tonight real quick.
I was going to say, I don't know how much it was like the guys that were out necessarily. Yeah. That I think Tank is probably the best argument there.
Yes, for sure. Because you needed to be more physical out there. But it was the defense. It was more the offensive line that got pushed around for Syracuse, and they had everybody. They switched out Spoon for Enrique Cruz, but there wasn't any injuries. They just got beat. But yeah, Tank was probably the more significant one. You lose Zeed Haynes. We mentioned the depth you have at receiver. Emmanuel Ross is not a key guy. You can talk me into Nixon, but Fran even said it. We had another running back, and Yassine Willis is a capable fill-in for Will Nixon. They're not the same type of back, but you certainly can put in a Yassine Willis and feel pretty good about that. Mike P says, I guess if there was an unexpected loss to happen, better sooner than later. A get-right game next week before the road trip, and no one will be high on their own supply. Now, I'm wondering about that, Emily. I asked Fidel Diggs about that after the game, how much of that was the bye week, and you got to restart the momentum, because he said one of the key things about being the more physical team, because he reiterated what Fran said. He said, we can't get out physical. And I said, well, how do you accomplish that? He says, we have to set the tone. We can't get pushed around in the first quarter. We've got to set the tone from the outset. But here's the thing. Stanford had a bye too, and Stanford flew across the country. They were at all the disadvantages, and they were the more physical team. So how much did the layoff have to do with it? I'm not going to say it didn't, but it certainly didn't affect the other team. Here's the one we were talking about, Emily. Tony, canceling flights to Vegas. Not going to watch another year of arm tackling. Coach should tie the linebackers and defensive backs hands behind their back at practice all week. Tony, don't cancel your flight because it's still Vegas. It's Vegas.
Don't cancel your flight, Tony. But I do understand the tackling has been pretty atrocious.
It's been bad. There's no doubt about it. As much as we focused on the offensive line, 1A, open field tackling, it's been pretty darn bad for this team. That has got to get cleaned up. There's no question about it. A couple more here, Emily, from Q's End Zone. Everyone and their mom knew where the ball was going, and they still put that dude one-on-one. Fran is just as incompetent as Dino, and I could care less what he has to say postgame.
Sometimes.
See how we got some people blowing off steam? I
think so, like, let's touch some grass. Let's touch some
Everybody
grass.
That's what we're here for, to listen to you guys. That's what the text line is for. But yeah, I don't think one loss puts everything in the same category as Dino. We went over some of the differences we're already seeing here. So what did Miyagi say? In through the nose, out through the mouth. I love Q's End Zone, by the way. He's as passionate a fan as it comes, but yeah, let's reel back that he's already as incompetent as the first guy comment. From Frankie, a little more recent here, says you got to expect games like this early in Fran's tenure. It wasn't his best night. It wasn't Kyle's best night. The offensive line had issues, and yet they were one stop away from winning this game. There you go. Mm-hmm. From Nigel, who says, very disappointing. Bottom line, can't put ourselves in that position. It's seen an uphill battle from 10-0 on. It seems whenever this team gets some hype, we get a reality check, but I guess that's life. From Timmy C, Kyle is miles ahead of our receivers in reading coverage and adjusting to the Russian blitz. Several times under pressure, McCord got the ball out early to a receiver. And he adds this, one more thing, Stanford is not very good. Their quarterback makes Garrett Schrader look like a pinpoint passer. The domination on the line of scrimmage cost us the game. The timing certainly wasn't there tonight, Emily, between Kyle and some of the receivers. And I think the reason for that, we went over, he was rushed a little bit, timing was off, had to scramble, guys weren't turning around looking soon enough because Kyle, half a second makes a huge difference. For the most part, in the first two games of the year, he had that time or got rid of it quick and knew exactly where he was going with the football. I'm thinking of that throw to Amari Hatcher against Georgia Tech that both Dane Brugler and I were obsessed with. He made some of those throws tonight. Make no mistake about it. He made a throw to Pena like that. The throw to Hatcher, I can think of 3 or 4 other throws where despite, having his cage rattled a little bit, still put it where it needed to be. So I think the timing was more of a pressure thing than anything tonight.
Yeah, like save for OG, who we already addressed was double teamed most of this game. And guys, that's going to be the case moving forward. And if he's not double teamed, then it's going to be Trevor Pena's double teamed. But the guys, Kyle has said that he's had a very strong connection with, strong chemistry with, and that we've seen him have strong chemistry with. Trevor Pena and Jackson Meeks Trevor had like the same game he's had the past 2 games. Like he had another 100-yard game, and Meeks had that phenomenal touchdown that put them up in the final minutes before ultimately the ending. But both those guys had great games and great catches and connections with Kyle tonight.
One last one here from Gene, who says, one thing I know, it's obvious that no one knows anything about this team. They're either really good or they're a mediocre Syracuse 7-6. I regret to inform the audience and Emily that I checked the voicemail line, and Rock and Ron still walking this one off somewhere in the swamps of Florida.
He's probably okay. It's a late
okay.
night.
It's all right. That's all right. Ron had to go to bed. That's okay, buddy. We'll hear from you next time, right? But always love hearing from Rock and Ron. I saw plenty of texts from Rock and Ron tonight. He was a little frustrated, so he just couldn't put the words together on the voicemail tonight. But we'll be listening and looking for him down the road here. So, any final thoughts before we depart for the weekend here, Emily, as Syracuse got back at it here after the bye week?
No, I think we'll probably look to talk to a couple assistants maybe on Tuesday night when we get players and assistant coaches, and see maybe we can chat with Nixon about kind of adjusting the offensive game plan and what happened in this game. And maybe Robinson. I know some people are starting to feel a little nervous about some of the defensive play calling. So yeah, stay tuned for more coverage throughout the week. That's what I'll say.
More to come, because I do have good news. Syracuse plays Holy Cross next week, and by all accounts,
right,
it's got to be a get-right game for the Orange.
And it's a sellout.
It's a sellout at the Dome.
Shocking.
That's right.
That anyone could have predicted that.
Sports, right? But you got Parents Weekend, Youth Sports Day. I think a lot of people maybe looked at the schedule and said, this is the one I can go to. Remember, that's the last home game they're going to play until November when Virginia
2nd.
Tech comes in, November 2nd. Second straight year, Syracuse doesn't have a home game in October, which is just one of those schedule quirks that came up for a couple different reasons. So at a sold-out JMA Wireless Dome, which, by the way, happy birthday, JMA Dome, turned 44 years old, September 20th, 1980, when it opened, with the victory over Miami of Ohio. But unfortunately, the 44th anniversary was a 26-24 victory for Stanford as they kick a field goal as time expires to win that one. Thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders for their great insight as always. Thanks to Emily and Chris Carlson and the crew for great work tonight at the JMA Dome. We will catch you next time here on Syracuse Football Post Game, presented by Crouse Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. For Emily Leiker, I'm Brent Dax. You guys have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.